So I want to welcome everybody to Coordinated Community Response. And just a little background, we started these meetings in March of 2020 when we went into COVID. And at that time, it was once a week because things changed so rapidly, and we tried to be sure that we served everybody that needed serving in our community, and sometimes had 40 people on the calls at that point. We now meet once a month. We also try to coordinate with Bristol Coalitions, and I send that out to the email list too. They meet the second Tuesday, and theirs now is a hybrid meeting. And we try to coordinate our programs as much as possible so we don't duplicate too much for who's doing the program. So want to welcome everybody today. Did I already say I'm Margaret Robin, and I work with both Family Promise and Appalachian Promise Alliance, and it was Appalachian Promise that started the Coordinated Community Response meetings. And I want to recognize Melissa Roberts from Appalachian Promise that's here, and Karen George, who pushed the record button. She's right in the middle, from Family Promise of Bristol. So, and hopefully at the end, we'll have a little bit of time for sharing. I think we're going to probably have a lot of discussion. So when we have a discussion, if people can self-identify, it's on the screen, but just be sure to tell us what organization. And if you put that in the chat as well, appreciate it. So, and welcome to people who are here for the first time. We always have people who have not attended, so we want to welcome those who are here for the first time and have opportunity to recognize you when we do our networking, etc. So today we have done I've done this, we've done it one other time with Youth Networking Alliance, where we showed a 0 to 3 film on Zoom, which is a little weird to be on Zoom and watching a video, but I know my life is such that I always intend to watch those webinars or watch something interesting or even listen to a podcast, and I don't get it done because it's low on the list and I have too much going on. So today we're going to watch this together, and hopefully it'll prompt a lot of discussion, I think, and that hopefully it will be rich and help us kind of focus a little bit on our community and some of the things that perhaps can help us here. So the Innovations in Ending Homelessness Roundtable Series is put on by HUD. And it's they have 2 of the available. They've held 3 or 4. I think there's 2 that the recordings are available so far. The next one is the criminalization to be uploaded is criminalization of homelessness. It was earlier in August, I think. No. Yeah, it was in August or July, into July. They haven't uploaded that one yet, but I'm looking forward to seeing that one as well. I was provided these by Christina Blevins with the City of Bristol, Tennessee, who I don't see here today. I think she might not be able to attend. And I think it was pretty awesome and thought-provoking and a lot of different opinions. So it's a panel of 6 people. They'll self-identify. Also, if y'all can, if you need to unmute and tell me that the sound is not good, or if you aren't seeing something or have a problem, you can put it in the chat. But if I am not seeing the chat, don't hesitate to unmute and say there's a problem. And so it's 90 minutes about total. We're going to watch about 30 minutes. I've actually thought about 38, but I think to give us enough time to discuss, we'll stop around 30 minutes. And then we'll all decide if we'll send out the link if you hadn't already looked for it, for people to do it on their own, and or we come back and watch some more together if we feel like that's advantageous for us to do. So does anybody have any questions or comments before we get started? If not, I will get ready to share my screen. All right.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to our Ending Homelessness Innovations Roundtables. We're so glad to have you all with us today. We have a really exciting panel. Today our topic is Housing First. Its key principles and values remain the foundational approach to preventing and ending homelessness. And so we want to talk today about how communities are implementing Housing First to meet their local needs as well as their system needs, and exploring what are current threats to the Housing First approach and how communities are pushing back against efforts to increase barriers to housing. So that's our topic today. So we're going to jump right in with introductions. I think as was mentioned, you can put your information in the chat. If you have questions throughout, please put them in the chat or the Q&A, whichever is easiest for you to access. But we're going to start out with a round of introductions of our panelists. So I'm Michelle Williams. I'm a HUD TA provider. I always forget to introduce myself. I'm excited for today. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a Black female, and I'm excited for today because this is necessary conversation for us to have as a country. And so I'm going to ask our panelists to give us their name, any identities or pronouns they would like to share with us, and what is one thing you're hoping to bring into today's discussion. And I'm going to start with Aaron.
Hello, everybody. My name is Aaron Weaver, and I'm out of Omaha, Nebraska. I'm the executive director of an organization called Reimagine, which uplifts lived experience and frontline voice into decision-making spaces and a bunch of other stuff. But kind of one of our main goals. And I would just like to bring different perspectives into this, and probably a really strong case to say that future innovation still needs to happen in all of this. So,
thank you, Aaron.
Of course, I would say that.
Hello, everyone. My name is Anna Rausch. I'm the VP of Programs for the Coalition for the Homeless. We're the lead agency for Houston, Harris, Fort Bend, and Montgomery counties. Looking forward to sharing what we've done with Housing First and seeing what the nation at large is looking at as well.
Great, thank you. Kelly?
Hi, I'm Kelly Kinghorn from Homeward in Richmond, Virginia, the regional COC, and I'm hoping to learn a lot, but also to share our system approach and our really pragmatic way that we've incorporated Housing First into our response to homelessness.
Thank you. Mark?
Hey, I'm Mark Horvath. I'm the founder of Invisible People. I come at this from a couple of different angles. I was formerly homeless. I worked as a case manager, family case manager, outreach case manager, and now I just scream real loud. I can't pick just one. There's a couple that I would like to bring to this, and one is we need to be authentic. We seem to avoid the problems. Instead of dealing with them, we try to paint Housing First as this magic solution, and it's not, and I believe that's hurt us. And the other thing is that we continue to message how housing helps homeless people, which I love. I think it's great. I think that's the main part, but the public doesn't want, we create resistance. So along with that, we have to message how housing is the only way to permanently remove encampments, right? Or something that shows public benefit.
All right, thank you. And Lauren?
Hi, everyone. My name is Lauren Fay. I use she, her pronouns, and I work at DESC, which is in Seattle, Washington. We're a large nonprofit provider here in the King County area. We've been a very early adopter in the Housing First movement. We own and operate over 1,500 units of permanent supportive housing. We're also a licensed behavioral health provider and crisis response provider. In my current role, I've done mental health outreach for many years. I've also managed some of our permanent supportive housing buildings. But in my current role now, I'm doing more policy and advocacy related work with our leadership team. which I'm really enjoying, yelling at folks about policies that are stupid and need to change. So that's kind of the lens that I bring to the table now. Things that are harmful to people, we need to fix. So I really enjoy that aspect of my work. And I'm just excited to be here with you all to talk about the complexities related to Housing First. A lot of the misconceptions and rhetoric that's out there right now, what's true, what's not true, what we can do about it. And yeah, just kind of keep pushing the message forward that the opposite of homelessness is housing. And so let's figure that out. Yeah, thanks. And I'm happy to be here with you all.
Great. Yeah, you have joined the right group, right? I think this is a yelling group today. So that's great. It's exciting, right? I'm a yeller myself. So so if we could just start, I just want to go around and have people share around what Housing First looks like in your community today, and if that's different than how it looked 10 years ago. And Anna, can we start with you?
Sure. So in Houston, we've housed over 30,000 individuals. We've decreased homelessness by 61%, and we are decommissioning encampments using housing. All of those things with the Housing First approach. So 10 years ago, we had the 6th largest homeless population in the nation, and we weren't doing a great job. So I would definitely say that Housing First has been a success for us.
Great. Aaron?
Oh, so Housing First is an interesting topic for me, and I think especially in this community, but I'm sure in a lot of other communities in terms of what is Housing First? What does that even mean? If we're being really, really honest and we're really, really putting it under a microscope, there's a lot of folks who I would love to be able to house for 3 months and take pressure completely off of them, because as we just said, the opposite of homelessness is being housed, right? The only way to end homelessness is by giving everybody a set of keys. And so I think that there's a misconception around sustainability, and that the only way we can give people housing is if they have this magical thing called sustainability. And I'm not even sure what sustainability means. I'm full of questions today, I guess, in terms of what does any of this mean? What does any of this mean for the individuals that we're trying to support? Why are we putting more pressure on people to be in housing when we know that the best way to have people sustain their housing is just by giving them that housing and giving them the chance? And so I think we deal with that a lot in terms of thinking that people need to have sustainability and they need to have employment right away and they need to have this and that goes all the way up to funding and funders and misconceptions about what we can do in our communities to really support getting people housed. Because here we have a lot of construction that's been going on for a very long time, trying to increase tourism and everything, and a part of that from both funders and leadership is that they don't want to have tourists seeing folks who are experiencing homelessness and who are unhoused. And that's also very frustrating and slightly ridiculous to me, because if we're going to ever fix something, we need to do it as a community and truly collaborative, rather than just trying to sweep things under the rug. And so there's just a lot of misconceptions, I think, around Housing First, and even what it is. I've been doing this a long time, and I don't even know that I know exactly what it should like, or what it should look like, or what it should be. I know that it is something which is amazingly beneficial if it can be done right, and giving people the chance to grieve, and giving people the chance to address some of the trauma before putting more pressure on them. We ask things of people that are unachievable, and that even we who are helping them, most of the folks that I work with are one step away from being in the same situations. Everybody's a few steps away from experiencing these things. And so why do we have expectations of people that are unrealistic, and that we ourselves would not do or expect from our neighbors? Yeah, that was a start.
I appreciate that. You mentioned the sustainability component. right? Like if we had to apply that standard to ourselves, right, none of us would be in housing, right? It's unrealistic. And so, because no one knows what the future, contains, and, people survive many things. Lauren, you had your hand up, so I'm assuming you want to go next.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking about that question, and one thing I think we can all do as advocates is try to align ourselves and get tight on our messaging with that answer of what is housing first. I think we can provide an answer maybe that we can all try to agree to some extent. Like, housing first is the idea that humans don't have to jump through magical hoops to deserve a roof over their head. Like, I think at the bare minimum, that's the thing. Like, it's just saying that, like, we fundamentally believe that all humans need shelter, need a roof over their head. And that's like the fundamental basis upon which like everything else is predicated. Like, your health, your safety, your ability to get all of your needs met, all those other things are just far more challenging without that roof, that door to lock behind you for safety. So I guess that would be like the first thing, just in terms of that basic answer, like the thing that I've been trying to push when I hear this question a lot, because it does get tossed around like, well, what is it anyway? Like, I'm just very quick at this point to provide an answer as quickly as possible. So that doesn't just like linger in the ether of like, oh, well, nobody knows. Like, yeah, we know what it is. Like, it really is a thing. So that was just one thing that popped into my head, is like, it can be as simple as breaking it down to that. Now, there are far more things I think that we can add to that, but for folks who maybe either aren't interested in the kind of work that we all do, or maybe don't care about the kind of work that we all do, you don't have to go much further. Like, just kind of that basic concept, I think, is enough to maybe get the conversation going or to end it. In terms of the actual original question, though, I was just going to say, housing first in the Seattle area, it's pretty well known and understood and implemented. Like, as a community, it is bought into by our larger systems as the like approach that needs to be taken to end homelessness. I think the systemic challenges that we've continued to face as a community, however, have been related to our growth planning around affordable housing in general. Seattle has grown enormously over many, many years, and we have not kept up pace with housing affordability the way that we've needed to for the city of our size. And you can see direct correlation with the cost of rent increase and the rise of homelessness. The folks that we help with our housing first model and folks who are experiencing homelessness with us at DESC are individuals with long histories of chronic homelessness who are living with behavioral health conditions, so mental health conditions and substance use disorders. And we serve adults primarily, or exclusively adults. And the numbers are what they're showing us over all of these years is that many of the individuals who have disabling conditions, lifelong disabling conditions, their income is often low and fixed, meaning like often they're receiving Social Security income. For years, that income was able to afford them the ability to rent a studio apartment. Maybe they had to share it with one or two people, but they could afford something. They could live somewhere. There is zero chance, zero possibility now for anyone to be able to afford anything near Seattle at this point with Social Security income. And so you just see that playing out and spreading further and further. And all the while the numbers have increased. And so I
Exactly.
see housing first as being an issue of scale at this point. The problem isn't the model, the problem is it hasn't been brought to scale.
Thank you. Kelly?
Yeah, so I might have forgotten the original question, but
It's all right.
yeah, it's good. In Richmond, Virginia, we've been doing housing first, and we say a housing first approach of really, understanding that our job as a coordinated homeless response network or coalition is to focus on the housing stability so that everything else we're doing as a community is more likely to be possible, right? If you want to improve schools or employment or support older adults, housing stability is what makes those other things possible. And our shift to that has been so important. We started, talking about it maybe for permanent supportive housing or chronic, but we really bought in when our transitional housing providers were looking at their budgets and the number of people they were serving and realized that they could serve more people at less cost if they shifted from transitional housing to rapid rehousing. So for us, in like 07, 09, that was part of our early shift, was shifting to housing. And one of the big things that, the difference now, 15 years in, was really how providers thought of themselves. Like now, like we're navigators. One of our barriers was like, well, people need us, and our providers needed to be needed. And now we're really understanding it's about how do we equip and empower and support and come alongside people in a housing crisis. The other, big change we see now is we work on a wider variety of housing options. Like what does each household want? How do they define what that stability looks like? We don't, it may not be an apartment, where they're the only ones on the lease. It could be safely reuniting with family or friends, so they have that support. And then the final sort of big change for us now is that we're really looking at how can our emergency shelters be a part of that housing response. So we talk about housing focused shelters. We're advocating from a system level for housing focused case management. And then with the clarity that we are doing a very small but critical problem, we can then help other systems join us and be accountable for doing all the other things that makes housing first more than just housing, right? And so it's that clarity and focus and then accountability. So that's where we are now. So.
Thank you, Kelly. Mark, do you want to weigh in on this kind of question about housing first, what it looks like today versus
Yeah. My team's
the
gonna
past?
laugh because I rarely take notes, but you got me taking notes. So, are you ready?
Yes.
What's really changed is support for housing as a solution keeps decreasing. And we went through a period where support for housing first was growing, and now we're going the other way. There was also a period, and I love in the comments, some people are asking, well, how do you fund both housing first and shelter? That wasn't even a conversation. We went from shelters only to housing only. I remember at NAH once, a shelter operator was in tears because housing operators slammed her because they're running a shelter, right? And now we realize it's both, right? And this is from Jennifer Loving from Destination Home. She has always said we should do 80% investment into housing because that solves homelessness, and 20%, the 80-20 rule, 20% into the shelters. Whatever that balance is, I don't know, but we have to start working together. It's both. It's not just housing. It's not just shelters. It's both. And I don't think, well, anyways, that's a whole nother thing, and I want to go through this. We have to fix housing first. One of the things I said earlier is we don't even acknowledge that there's problems with it, right? We just brush aside. I have a friend of mine, her name was Rocky. She was placed into housing. and she sat there for over a year. I went to go visit her. She had gained 100 pounds and she was sleeping in the backyard because nobody went to visit her. Luckily, I know the housing provider. I contacted them. They went and connected with Rocky, and she went into a hospital, right? Because she was so sick because nobody went to visit her. The couple below them, also Housing First, were in a unit without a refrigerator or a bed for over a year. And I get it. There's challenges, right? You don't have the right housing. You don't have the right support services. It's hard to scale. I know it's not magical that you can do this, but whatever messaging we have is not going to work until we first figure out how to scale Housing First, right? If you're making a bad hamburger and nobody likes it, you can't have all this messaging. It's the greatest hamburger in the world because people say, no, this thing sucks, right? And the opposition to Housing First latches on to the failures, right? That is really, really something that we have to fix. We first have to fix that. And so I get it. Housing is a human right. I get it, right? The public doesn't. The public does not. And we have been messaging, well, Housing First, it helps people get better. They can lock their door. Jim can brush his teeth. Susie can take a shower. The public doesn't care about Susie and Jim. They pay good money. They work for their rent and mortgage, right? We also have to add in the affordable housing crisis. I mean, big. I know, Lauren added that in Houston. Anna talked about their reduction. A big part of that is the affordable housing. They have affordable housing in Houston. When we talk about Housing First, we need to connect it that without affordable housing, there is no Housing First. I just went to Helsinki. And, BBC, CNN, everybody's been there. I go there and I say, wow, it's far more than Housing First. It's also affordable housing. They go together. It's so important. And when it comes to personal benefit messaging, and I'm going to keep repeating this and I'm going to play an example. So here is the housing minister that is actually center right. So he's not quite Donald Trump, but he's close, right? And he was the person instrumental in getting Finland all together on Housing First. This is how he messages Housing First. And notice, not once does he talk about benefit to homeless people.
All around the world, you see homeless people in the streets. In some cities more, in some cities less. In Finland, in Helsinki, you see less because of the Housing First. And I'm sure that is something which benefits the city a lot. It has helped the community. I think that the people here living in Helsinki thinks that this is a safer and a pleasant city because of not having those people on the streets. And it's also a better city for visitors, for tourists, and also a better city for example, foreign direct investments, knowing that this is a clean, safe, pleasant, well-organized city. So you are actually able to create a huge amount of different kind of benefits, both for the community and also for the local business society.
Notice he hit all the buttons, right? He hit tourism, he hit commerce, he hit safety for the public. Never once did he say, well, housing is a human right. This will help people restabilize. And I believe he believes it, but he didn't message that to get buy-in. And this is where we have failed. We've actually created, I know of multi-million-dollar marketing campaigns pushing for Housing First that have really only repelled people away from Housing First. And this is how I am messaging Housing First. It's a really short segment. I know there's a link to the full documentary. We followed a woman from her home, from her tent into her home.
People don't realize you send a homeless person into jail, you're going to get out and still be homeless. The only way to get rid of encampments is to supply housing and prevent homelessness. It is growing unsurmountably. It's a housing crisis. It's not a homeless crisis. It is a housing crisis.
Visually, if you watch the whole video, that visually we show that the solution, all the people want is encampments gone. Let's go from that. That's the baseline. They want encampments gone. So if you want support for housing first, I love it that Jim can brush his teeth and Mary can take a shower and Jose is so much, you know, he can heal the layers of trauma because he can lock a door. I love that, but the public doesn't. And we have to start measuring. The other thing is, like, when we're showing a 40-unit building, which we have to show success, right? And we show that Jim can brush his teeth and Jose can lock the door. That's great. It really is. We have to show that, but message somehow that it's helping the public. We don't do that. And the public says, that's nicer than my apartment. And I work for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry about the passion.
It's okay. No, we love the passion. Bring it. Okay. Because we're all here because we're passionate about this, right? And it is conversations that we need to have and that we're having in communities and that are going on in the chat. The chat is like off the chain at the moment. I want to just come back to two things. One, I think as a field historically, right? And I've been doing this work for like, I don't know, 25 years or so, right? We always have just had one thing, right? Like we only had one thing. We had shelter and then we had permanent supportive housing. And we always just act like we have this one thing. And exactly what Kelly mentioned about the range, right, of housing options that we need to have available so that we can really stop trying to fit people into a certain box. But we as a field grasp on to this one thing. We are dealing with a problem that is extremely difficult, challenging, emotional. If it is that way for us, it's 150 times more difficult for people who are experiencing homelessness. And so we're all trying to find something. And so not saying that shelter, housing options, supported housing options, and affordable housing options all go together, right? So there's a question about if an area doesn't have shelters and we're doubled up, which is considered homeless, if you're doubled up in some situations, right? And it's not a planned activity, then yes, right? If people would want housing of their own, but are unable to access that, then yep, that is homelessness. And it doesn't have to be within a shelter. I'm sure there are people sleeping outside probably in that community if you don't have access to safe shelter. So I think that's really important to mention, is that these are not things that are standalone, right? If a full comprehensive community approach looks at what are the needs of the people in your community and what's the best way to help them move into safety, move to housing, right? So that they can, proceed with living their lives. The other thing that.
All right. We're going to call it there. So I'm going to first just ask if anybody has any comments right offhand, and then I've got some prompts to be able to help with some discussion. But does anybody have immediate reactions or thoughts, or just immediately right off? And you can raise your hand or you can unmute and speak, and we'll see how that goes. Hey, Lynn.
Hey. I will comment because I had seen this before, and
Right.
And I certainly appreciate very much the comments. I will say, at the time that Housing First became a thing, one of the real differences was, and we were wrapping, and Margaret will remember this, Kay's on here, some will, when Family Promise was getting started, and we were trying to gain some funding. People Inc. at that time had some HUD money, but because we offered case management, we couldn't do housing first, right? At the time housing first came in, it said the whole purpose is get them into housing, and that's it. That solves everything. And then since then, what we have seen is that we get them into housing, and 3 or 4 months later, they're being evicted because the skills and the planning that is required to maintain that housing doesn't happen. And so I think housing first is awesome, and I think we have to get there, but I do think we have to understand that somewhere along the line, supportive services have to be there to wrap around so that we can help to maintain that stability, because we don't want to think about having to rehouse people 6 months or 6 months after they're housed. And case in point, we housed someone with emergency housing voucher who had been unhoused for an extended period of time. When he got housed, it was perfectly natural for him, because he had lived in community in a tent setting. He brought in all the people that he had been, his sense of community, brought them all into his apartment, and he couldn't do that. We have rules about that. But to him, that didn't make sense. He didn't understand it. And unfortunately, since then, he has been evicted, and we tried really hard. We tried so hard. But there has to be that support in order to help people to maintain that stability.
So, and Lynn Pennell is with Bristol, Virginia Housing, and also they don't talk about it in the whole thing, but recently, and I know Houston, and there's somebody on here from Houston, but I don't think she uses it at any point, but the concept of community first. So it's not just housing first, it's also thinking about community, and certainly people who live in camps or in homelessness, they have a community. And if they get housed, they're being pulled from that community. So it's helping, how do we also help with that redevelopment of that community? Does anybody else want to say something right off the bat? Pete, you were unmuted. Do you want to add?
No, I just put my picture back up.
Okay. Okay. Christina, I know you've seen this before. Do you want to say anything before we start asking a few questions?
Hey, you guys, I don't. I mean, I think that the series, and I'm sorry, my computer has been flipping out this morning, so I'm on a phone and I don't even know how to get my picture or myself up there. But I think this series that HUD put out, which is funny because if you watch this series, you see they're not very kind to HUD in a lot of these videos. But I think that the discussion, HUD is in the place where they're like, we have to have this discussion if we're going to make an impact in changing homelessness in our country. So I do appreciate that they do that. And thanks, Margaret, for starting the series off for everybody.
It was your idea, Christina, to share those to start with. Also, it may be why they're slow in getting the next video up. They may be figuring out what they need to do with any damage control with some of these. But anyway, okay, anybody else right offhand? So I think that there's several areas to prompt discussion. And one is for us, for how are we doing housing first in our community? And then I'm particularly interested in Mark from the Invisible People is pretty direct on a lot of things, but thinking about how we communicate with the public and how can we do more education, what does that messaging need to be, and then also stability and sustainability, which Lynn touched on a little bit, and also then what kind of resources does it take to do this work, and what kind of resources do we have? So those are some of the areas that I thought we could talk a little bit. But does anybody want to talk about how we are seeing housing first happen in our community? What's happening with that? How do we approach it? anybody have thoughts on that? And I know some people here work directly with housing. Some people work more with the support of people who are either in affordable housing or are experiencing homelessness. But does anybody want to? Or from what you saw in the video, add any thoughts you have? Pete, and Pete, identify, you're from Fayette. No, you're not, excuse me. That's the wrong Stigers. You're from Kentucky. Say which one you're from.
Yeah, I work at Frontier Housing in Kentucky. I work remotely from my home here in Bristol.
And we did hear from your person who had been an intern or AmeriCorps who gave us racism.
Yeah.
Just a few months ago. That was excellent. So
Yeah, it was Faith.
Yeah.
She yeah, I'm glad she did a good job. Speaking to housing generally, I think that one of the main problems is there's just simply not enough. And I think regardless of what we need to do, we need to be building as many houses as possible, whether they're large houses or small houses or whatever. There's just not enough in the market. And yeah, so housing first is going to be a challenge because there's not enough places to put people.
So also, I forget which, it was Lauren from anyway, from Seattle, or I think that's who it was. But we've had a lot of people in this country who manage on set income, primarily Social Security, and then they have additional help. And in the recent years, and particularly real recently, we're seeing the prices go way up for rentals, that they are no longer affordable. So we are seeing, and I know at Family Promise of Bristol, at the day services at Salvation Army, we are seeing more, and we can get the data for the age. I'm not sure how much we can get for disability, so we need to look at how to collect that. But we are definitely seeing a rise of older adults who are no longer able to pay rent, and also people who are in wheelchairs, people who have disabilities who are unable to pay rent. So we're seeing that definitely in our community. I'll also say that overall, the number one cause of homelessness in our country is lack of affordable housing. So number one is not addiction, it's not mental illness, it's not, all those things play into it, certainly, but number one is the lack of affordable housing. So other thoughts? So I'll switch gears and ask Mary, go ahead. Mary, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to add, we do at 211 Virginia, we have what we call an anchor agency program where we bring together kind of major service providers from all across the state and talk about data. And right now our data is all housing. So just kind of to echo and validate what's already being said, we're seeing, we had that older adults conversation of not only is it getting more difficult for older adults, but we also have a rising aging population. And so that population, people are living longer, which is wonderful, but that also means that they're on that Social Security, they're on that set income for longer. And where we previously had infrastructure to support people for 10, 15, 20 years, now we're needing that infrastructure to support them for 20, 30, 35 years. So that's been a challenge that people noted. And then we also had some conversations about the difficulty of grant funding. There's not a lot of local funding, as we know, for housing. A lot of it is federal, a lot of it is through HUD. And when there is local funding, often there's different restrictions, and it can be really, really difficult to find places to put people unless they fit in very specific boxes, which again, I know we all know, we've all tried to do it, but that was something that was echoed kind of across the state. And so I just wanted to share that perspective from our group as well.
Right. Yeah, and I know a lot of people on here do operate on grant funding, and it's really difficult when you don't learn whether your staff has a job till 6 weeks, 4 weeks, 2 weeks before the end of your current funding. And that's very difficult to keep experienced staff. It's not fair. It should not be expected that people live that kind of lives. So that affects our programming and our abilities to do a good job. And then if you bring on somebody else and it's a year-long grant, it takes a couple of months at least to get people on board. Anyway, the grant funding is a huge issue. And certainly we know nationally HUD has been way behind. They've been cutting housing dollars when they absolutely needed to. So I want to ask about, Mark Horvath was pretty hot on the messaging and saying that the public just doesn't care. So who is giving messages in our community? What kind of messages are they given, and what kind of messages are needed for who needs to know more? How do we get those messages out? So can some folks weigh in on what they think along those lines?
Honestly, all you have to do is take a look at Facebook every once in a while in those community groups and unfortunately see what some people feel about our friends, our unhoused friends, and not offering any solution, just offering a lot of anger and frustration, which frustration may be warranted, but a lot of social media fuels the fire.
Very good point, Jesse.
Yeah,
Lynn?
Jesse's absolutely right. And unfortunately, even from some of our community leaders, thank you, Margaret, for not joining that bandwagon, but speaking the other side. I made this statement to some city leaders not long ago, actually. And I said, because they called the homeless a problem. And I said, no, they're people. They're people. And I think we have to remember that first. They're people. The situation sometimes creates a problem for them and for the community. And that's what we need to look at. But first and foremost, we need to remember that they are people. And so I think setting priorities and talking about that and helping people to understand that we are dealing with people.
So how did y'all feel about the Helsinki where he didn't talk about that? He talked about, and he may address it again later, but his is you want people off the street, put them in housing. So anytime anybody talks, all that conversation, anybody says things, then the only answer is, put them in housing. Now it's a bigger conversation with those wraparound services, et cetera, but that's where it has to start if we're gonna do problem solving. It is, we have got to have the housing, because we can do all the work that we want, but if we don't have housing if we can get people ready for housing, we can have which part of that we can't because there's not enough money to do that, but ideally that's what we do. But if we don't have the housing to put them in, then we cannot do that job. So,
Right.
And Pete, I think that goes back definitely to what you said too. So
Yeah, and I do agree with that. I do think we have to remember that every community is different. Every community is unique, and every community has their own struggles. And so if we think, and we can get ideas from other communities, but I do think we can't look at what has worked well in other communities and think we just replicate that and it'll work here, because we are different. And we're proud of our differences in a lot of areas, not so much in some of the others. But I do think and I love the idea, and Pete, I certainly would not argue that we need more housing. We need that. But I still maintain that we can get them in housing, and we try. I mean, we've had emergency housing vouchers. We do regular vouchers. We have worked closely, especially during COVID. We worked with the had a group, and we worked with a lot of folks in the community to help get folks out of hotels into housing. Tried really hard to do all that. But at some point, if they don't have the skills and the resources to maintain that housing, I mean, collectively as a community, we cannot, at that level of interaction with people, continue to do that on an infinite timeline, right? We cannot continue to do that for the long term. So we have to be resourceful, and we have to look at what's in the community that we can help people to be supported and to be stable. And I do think that's important.
So, anybody else want to weigh in on Pete?
Well, and I wasn't trying to say that the other things aren't necessary. And I'm curious, it may be that part of the conversation, I mean, the term long-term supportive housing is coming to mind, where there are people that are just not capable of living on their own. And it seems like as a society, we have a choice. Well, do we want those people living on the street, or do we want them living somewhere that they can be safe and warm and fed? And that may be a different, I think that is a different kind of housing than an apartment, where they are going to eventually have to be self-supporting. And I wonder what that kind of housing needs to be part of this conversation.
Well, and what you're talking about is permanent supportive housing, and we do have some of that. People Inc. has Kings Mountain over on West State Street, and People Inc. and Highlands Community Services in our community on the Virginia side have permanent supportive housing vouchers, and that does support. There's a case manager attached to that. People have to be unhoused for a period of time. There has to be a mental health diagnosis, all of that, and so that's exactly the population that we're talking about. And that does come with services, and it's awesome. And they do such a good job with that. They are having a hard time finding places to put people. And, you know, we got a grant from the Home Consortium. We're going to be building some duplex units on Moore Street it's not going to solve the problem, but it'll be a little drop in that bucket that will help. And so we're happy about that. But, you know, there again, the success of those programs, I think, is tied to the case management that's required in that program to help folks to maintain that stability. And I think what we have to think about too is motivating. We're talking like we can just put these people here and they're going to be really, really good. They have free will, right? They are people. And if they don't want to stay there, we can't make them stay there. If they don't want to participate, we can't make them do that. So I think we encourage them, we motivate them, we do all of those things. But at the end of the day, you know, these are people with their own, and they have decision-making abilities, right? So we have to think about that.
I'm going to jump on real quick. This is Casey Cotto. I'm with the Mental Health Association of East Tennessee. And something that I think is just interesting to note. So when we're doing any kind of training and we're talking about mental health, one of the things that we say is, you know, your needs have to be met before you can even think about focusing on your mental health, right? Well, if somebody is unhoused, if somebody's basic needs, shelter, or is finally being met, you know, and then they get to sit there and think about, oh, you know, like I do get to start taking care of myself in another way. Like I do get to focus on my mental health, right? And so like what Lynn is saying here, you know, there are some folks who might sit back and say, you know, this isn't for me, or this isn't what is going to serve me at this time. This isn't what's going to support me or help with my stability, or any of those fun words we've been throwing out, right? And so there is that piece to it that I think that we often, I know we're aware of it, if that makes sense, right? But I don't know, it's important, I think, I have to get my mental health plug in somehow, guys. I mean, come on now. but you know what I mean? It is important to kind of keep in mind there. So that was all I wanted to add.
Absolutely. Good points. But and it'd be interesting to see what some of the data is for the permanent supportive and what are the percentage of people that do stay in. I mean, there are mental health conditions that people go on and off their medication because they think they're doing better. They don't like how they feel when they're on it, so they go off and cause things to go backwards, etc. So there are all those things. I don't know that in our country we have tried the permanent supportive housing enough or long enough to know how, is that 20%? Is that 50%? Yeah, I would imagine it's a lot less than 50% who decide that they want to do something differently. But the Seattle, I think she said they have 15,000, which of course Seattle area is huge, but I think was it 1,500 or 15,000 units for permanent supportive housing. So, and I think also going back to that community piece is figuring out how do we help people find community, develop community, and and we know from everything now, and I'm looking at Melissa, and it's ACEs, and it's also addiction services and recovery. Relationships are the most important part of those things, and that's what community is. So it's helping people find and develop those relationships that become part of their community. Okay, so I think it's about time to quit. What I would like to ask you all is, do we want to watch more of this together and talk more, or do we just want to send out the link and or do we want to send out the link and ask people to watch it and then come and talk about it? So how do y'all feel about the benefit of watching this together and talking a little bit? So if I can hear from some of y'all.
I know I'm new, so I'm brand new offering insight, but I think I liked getting to watch a little bit and just have that refresher. What might be nice, maybe send the link ahead of time, say, we're going to discuss this section to this section, and then maybe just play a few refreshers rather than the full 38 minutes, just play a few clips or kind of jump through to be like, we're going to talk about this. This is what their thought was. What are your thoughts, kind of thing.
Okay. Other thoughts?
I agree.
Christina like that. Jessica like that. So
I like that.
Pete likes that. Okay. All right. So the way we've been pretty flexible with which is good and bad. Planning ahead is nice and putting out a list of programs, but sometimes it's also nice to be flexible. So when something comes up, you can jump in with it. So our next meeting is September 27th. At 11 again on Zoom. At this point, I think we might go ahead and plan on that. So, and if we're sending out the link ahead of time, we would need to do that. I'm behind on getting things up on YouTube and reminding people, so people could watch this clip first on YouTube and then pick it up. I mean, on our recording that we've talked about. So that can be motivation for me to make time to do that. The other is the Bristol Coalition. I try to share that email, plus some of you may be already on the list, so you end up getting two. Is September 10th at 12 noon. It's a hybrid meeting. Lynn, do y'all have a topic yet?
Yes, we're going to be hearing from Appalachian Independence Center. That's a community partner based in Abingdon, and they deal with people with varying disabilities. They offer a wealth of programming, and so they're going to be the program on that September time. So
right. So okay, so we're a couple minutes after. Does anybody have anything else that they're dying to add, either for the discussion or for something that you either need or need people to know from your organization that you represent? If not, then I think we're finished. And Karen, you could stop recording, and then I'm going to hang on to copy the chat and do what I do at the end. So